In this installment, I am overjoyed to discover a serious find on my classic collection as my Friday night feature takes me through the HBO presentation of the life and death of Peter Sellers. I paired that with a deep dive into the Great Siegfeld from my current collection, plus, in what I've been watching, I finally got to see Ninjago. Welcome to the show.
He doesn't have that on video, does he? We'll find out together on video, Fuzzy.
I've been so excited about putting this episode together since about Wednesday night this past week, when Geoffrey Rush strode across my screen through an empty gray sound stage, took a seat in front of a monitor, and queued up a psychedelic vision of hundreds of sardonically arched eyebrows behind black-rimmed glasses dancing through swinging 60s animation, all portraying Peter Sellers in countless guises, races, and genders above the irrepressible Tom Jones singing, "What's new, Pussycat? Whoa, whoa, whoa."
Friday night feature.
My eyes got so big. I'd recorded this, but never had a chance to watch it at any point in the past 10 years, and had forgotten about it completely. Geoffrey Rush was cast perfectly in the 2004 film, which took us from Sellers' early career in radio, his brilliant break into film work, his tumultuous love and family life, his later breakdown in darkness through the prism of Kubrick, Dr. Strangelove, and the concept of mutually assured destruction. Rush inhabited the role of a man who wasn't there disturbingly well. He portrayed brilliant British comic actor Peter Sellers over half his life as being driven by his mother's own ambition for him to take on larger and larger projects, to pursue success for the sake of it almost, achieving pinnacle status in the realm of British cinema. Beyond their posh circumstances, however, this success was not perfectly mirrored in his home life with his first wife, Anne. Oh, they seemed happy enough as his star ascended, but there was a lurking psychosis. When his son attempted to fix a scratch on Peter's motor car's paint job by adding a racing stripe of house paint, for example, Peter had some kind of breakdown, wherein he stormed into his son's room and stomped his toy cars, echoing his son's line, "Look, Michael, I've fixed all your toys. Aren't they beautiful?" I mean, yeah, the racing stripe wasn't great, but you were calling to have the thing repainted anyway, Daddy Dearest. The film clearly took the kind of shortcuts and liberties you need to cram a quarter-century of a man's life into 2 hours, but managed to illustrate some kind of mental disconnect in his pairing with Sophia Loren. Before his even meeting her, he was talking to the press about taking outrageous liberties with her, which echo some of the seamier scenarios we're hearing about in the #MeToo movement of Hollywood today. Asked what it felt like to be working with Ms. Loren, he rejected such acceptable descriptive words as excited and pleased and wonderful in favor of soft, warm, like a little boy in a bakery very early in the morning. I know this is the culture of the time and the nature of rampant sexism in the industry, but my God, man, you've not even yet met this woman. I mean, this ever-so-married woman, by the way, and that's the press you're talking to. He works with her on a couple of projects, including a comic love song. He's had her to their country home. There's a suggestion that he bought a house in town to be nearer to her, and archly assures the interior decorator he's hired that whatever Mrs. Sellers wants is okay by him. And the next thing Ms. Loren knows, he's summoning her to private dinners in darkened restaurants so that they can canoodle. She assures him that she's quite happily married, thank you, and says he should return to his wife. After she leaves, he figures, but of course, Anne, after all, should be the first to know. So he sits down with his family and tells them that he is in love with Sophia Loren, and he's going to go to be with her. His young daughter asks him if he loves them, as his wife's heart breaks at the question. He assures her no, of course, he still loves them, just not as much as he loves Sophia Loren. Well, this doesn't end as he'd like. He drives to the studio with a big bouquet of roses to declare his undying love for the still very married Sophia Loren, but she's not even there. Instead, he encounters her stand-in, who he invites to his car for what can't have been an especially comfortable round of lovemaking, after which he is presumably over it. He goes back to Anne, who, in fact, has taken him up on his offer of betting the interior decorator. She returns from that assignation to find her home in shambles. Peter's destroyed everything as literally as he has figuratively, and threatens if she leaves, he'll throw himself from the balcony. She does leave, telling him she'll meet him downstairs then. One brilliant piece of storytelling in this film involves Geoffrey Rush inhabiting the people in Sellers' life, along with Sellers himself. The film will stop, the cameras will pull out to reveal the actors on the soundstage, and Sellers will address the camera directly in an aside dressed as Sellers' father, or his wife, Anne, or his mother, or as director Blake Edwards. It broke it up perfectly and allowed for some exposition and insight that invited us behind the scenes in this intriguing biopic. His marriage to Anne now firmly in the past tense, he dove into his film work. We were sadly whipped right past his towering performance in Lolita to his buffoonery as Inspector Clouseau in The Pink Panther, which he said sounded like a gay strip club, and gave a reasonably good illustration as to how difficult he could be to work with. Life and Death included a delightful scrap in his development of Clouseau's voice aboard an airline tormenting a poor air hostess, however, so that was fun. His past work with Blake Edwards and consulting with a charlatan psychic led, however indirectly, to his taking up with the beautiful Britt Ekland, as his career success built to his work with Stanley Kubrick on Dr. Strangelove or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. His taking on multiple voices in the film continued a conversation he'd once had with Anne about how he had no personality of his own, so he inhabits these characters until they inhabit him. And Dr. Strangelove is compelling. So compelling he walks around as him off-set in a conversation with his mother, though honestly it had to be at least as dark as the pedophile Claire Quilty he played in Lolita 2 years before. Britt stood by him through his heart attack and subsequent pacemaker, but the relationship fell apart, as did his mental stability, as his movie career went down the toilet. In an interview, he said theaters were showing his films as a means of clearing them out for cleaning. He clearly wasn't enjoying the same level of success into the 70s as he had before Dr. Strangelove, which is insane, but Life and Death suggested the problem was a disconnect from where Sellers was hoping to take things as a serious dramatic actor, and screenwriters and directors who felt that they could put him on a set and point a camera at him with the direction, do something funny. This clearly wasn't the formula for success that people might have been hoping for, and his career tracked through uncertain territory until he reunited with Blake Edwards for another Pink Panther film. He appreciated the shine of success once again, but could not let it pass without publicly ripping into Edwards as a talentless hack. He'd had sufficient self-awareness he'd wanted to explore his character study of a man with no personality, defined entirely in negative space, Chance the gardener in being there. He'd been obsessed with this idea for years at this point and was finally able to achieve it to great acclaim quite near the end of his too short life at the age of 54. Indeed, despite the shaky later years and drug use implied by Life and Death, Sellers was a multimillionaire when he died. Closing captions report he died in the midst of trying to disinherit his fourth wife, however, and he left only $2,000 each to each of his children. As I said, I was overjoyed to find this film in my classic collection. Peter Sellers is one of my very favorite comic actors, and troubled and troubling as his personal life occasionally would seem to have been. Bye! I'm going to go live with Sophia Loren! And cautionary as his tale might well be, there's no denying his abilities as a storyteller. For having died so young, Sellers put together one of cinema's strongest bodies of work, creating characters who resonate through the world of cinema decades removed. Lolita is horrifying, for example, but his stammering milquetoast portrayal almost manages to humanize the leering, knowing, grasping second-fiddle pedophile Claire Quilty as penned by Nabokov, making the main character, Humbert Humbert, also a pedophile and a murderous one to boot, almost acceptable by comparison. His Clouseau is ridiculous, but 50 years later, when Frances McDormand voices the outrageously talented Chantal Dubois in Madagascar, Europe's Most Wanted, the parallels are impossible to miss. And hell, I myself fall into the voice of his Dr. Strangelove occasionally, because he is such a joyously psychotic character, and it's just so very much fun. Loved this show. Resquiescat in pace. Mr. Sellers. Thank you for that.
Diving into the classic collection.
I was so happy for the life and death of Peter Sellers because my classic collection was otherwise bereft of highlights. Standard issue fall of 2007 episodes of Ugly Betty, My Name is Earl, Journeyman, Blood Ties, Moonlight, Boston Legal, Bionic Woman, Bones, Reaper, Heroes, Life, Pushing Daisies, Dirty Sexy Money, Grey's Anatomy, and Chuck. I did encounter a stray episode of Samantha Who, which I enjoyed, Season 1, Episode 6, where she consults a hypnotherapist in an attempt to combat her amnesia, and confuses memories of a school production of Annie with her actual life, and she discovers that she actually owns the apartment her boyfriend's been staying in. Also, I see I've cataloged the episode of The Simpsons that introduces Coolsville Comics and Toys, Milo the hipster comic book store owner, and his girlfriend, Strawberry, whose purse is a lunchbox. Fun, but it's hard to parlay that into an actual Friday night feature, and I despaired of having much of anything to talk about this weekend. So I was delighted to discover Peter Sellers lurking about at the end of disc 354. I'd started the show over from the beginning on the next disc, so it takes over the entirety of disc 355, and I could watch it without interruption. Unfortunately, the tape I'd recorded it to was wearing out towards the end, so the last third or so of the DVD transfer is a bit staticky. But again, I had no trouble watching it or making out what was happening. It's just another one of those things that happens when you reuse tapes.
Current collection.
Since I knew I'd be talking at length about the life and death of Peter Sellers, I figured I'd take the opportunity to explore a deep cut from my current direct-to-DVD recordings. I'd catalogued the Great Siegfeld much nearer the beginning of this process. Title 6 on disc X14. William Powell portrays the impresario Florence Ziegfeld Jr., son of a virtuoso perfectionist musician. He seeks to make his own way, presenting marquee if somewhat lowbrow entertainment in Europe. He promotes the spectacle of strongman Sando, the world's strongest man, who he has this brilliant idea to promote him with his shirt off, which makes quite the impression and in turn brings the audience in. He parlays the success into an American tour, which goes not well, and he's back on the boat to England to poach some new talent for the Broadway stage. He brings over French singer Anna Held, who does not go over so very well, but a brilliant anti-marketing campaign and this new concept he's had of backup dancers wherein he, get this, puts beautiful women on stage for people to look at, seems to be taking off. He achieves some success, but whereas the Ziegfeld of Streisand's Funny Girl seems to have his act together, the Ziegfeld we encounter in The Great Siegfeld is always one step away from ruin, always running one flim-flam swindle ahead of disaster. He's portrayed as having shrewd insight into the vagaries of human motivation, displaying an early mastery of negging, for instance, to get women to do what he wants them to, and then using that to get everyone else to give him money somehow. At one point, when the costumes for his finale are held hostage at the stage door until he can fork over some money for them, he turns them away, horrified. How could they be for his finale? He would never have ordered such a thing, until the costumer is all but insisting he put them on as dancers for the finale. This movie was 3 hours long and could have benefited from some editing. They spent nearly as much time on his convincing Anna Held to come over to America and work based on a contract he had no backing for as to bring on Fanny Bryce using similar machinations and added nothing to the story beyond being biographically a thing that happened. The concern here is that if they spent money on sets and costumes for one of Ziegfeld's famously overblown stage productions, by God, they used every frame of film they shot, and they did spend that money and they did shoot those scenes. It was basically a biopic interspersed with lavish song and dance numbers. Unlike the Sellers piece, however, despite a minute or so with the man's father at the beginning and a couple of clumsy attempts at a through story, I never got a sense of what was driving the Great Siegfeld in all of these exploits. I mean, what was it about this street barker, who, had he been making ends meet with his assorted street performers, would seemingly have been happy to continue doing so? What drove him to flim-flam his way into the American theater? What reserves of ambition were driving these larger and larger stage productions, stages extending into the audience and pushing the very limits of stagecraft? As he sold his last possessions to mount 4 hit shows at the same time and become the greatest sensation the world had ever seen, potentially despite 4 gossipy wags in a barbershop, it seemed, only to lose everything in the market crash of 1929. I mean, Was that just bad luck? A fatal personality flaw? Grotesque one-upsmanship right up to the very end? I mean, honest to God, he'd pushed production values into the stratosphere. What more did he have to prove at this point? I mean, this movie seemed to recount every conversation the man ever had and every dance step in every production he mounted, but failed to pull the curtain back on why he was doing it. That might have not been a priority when the show was made in 1936, but its absence leaves untold significant insights into one of the most influential names in the world of entertainment. Otherwise, not a whole lot to report on my current collection either. I mean, I did see where I'd apparently missed an episode of Trial and Error when the show was running last spring. This made me sad since I was hoping to put together a homemade DVD set for this series, but it presented a wonderful opportunity to try tracking it down. I've had to capture video by camera phone one other time. Toward the late 90s and early 2000s, MTV was including code with some of its music videos that made it impossible to transfer material recorded to VHS onto DVD, which was annoying and a bit pointless, but at the time probably felt like the only way to combat digital file sharing, so I completely understand it. That's not especially helpful when you've got a bunch of stuff on VHS tapes and you want to transfer it to DVD for your own use, and I'll note that because of this, there's some material in my VHS collection that simply never made it to DVD. But towards the end of my VHS transfer project, I'd encountered a recording of Beyoncé's performance in the 2001 hip opera Carmen that featured this code and was resisting transfer, and I was just as determined to keep it. It was a recording that I'd captured on VHS, and I could absolutely watch the original recording, but it would not let me transfer it. So when nothing else seemed capable of counteracting this pernicious code, I set up my camera phone opposite my television screen, and an hour and a half later, I had a digital copy of the show. I pulled it onto my laptop, processed it, and saved it to DVD. This seemed to be my only option for trial and error, too, if I wanted to make a homemade DVD set. I set up the camera phone in a darkened room, purchased the episode from Amazon for $3, and streamed the thing. I've pulled in and processed the video, and once I get to the point of making myself a homemade DVD set, probably over Thanksgiving weekend, I'll be able to include the complete first season. And again, this is all for my own personal use, yeah. I even had an outtake. When I was recording the episode, I forgot to tell Ralph that that's what I was doing, and when he got up, he exclaimed, "Oh, you're watching the episode of both your laptop and your phone." No, to be fair, I'd forgotten to tell him what I was doing at the time, and it was easy enough to run it back and edit together later, but I thought it was a fun inclusion for a blooper reel. I see that I also ran into the Turner Classic Movie production of Franz Kafka's The Trial from 1962, which was a somewhat disturbing dystopian idyll, wandering from room to room, each with different rules and characters and their own weirdnesses I didn't have much insight on. I suspect director David Lynch saw this film early on, and it was probably influential, but the point for me here is that I never had. I'd never encountered The Trial before, so once I did, I heard the opening line of Seal's "Crazy" somewhat differently. Whether or not it's a reference to the parable of the man waiting outside the door to the law at the beginning of that movie, it added a window on it that I hadn't had before. Also, whether or not this is the case, it feels like the movie does speak to the opening scene of the third season of Fargo on FX, with the prisoner in the bureaucrat's office, which was cool either way, but having seen it so recently, it was recorded to the very next disc as it happens. The reference was fresh in my mind when the series returned, and it seemed to lay in some additional depth I might not have apprehended otherwise. Beyond that, it looks like I managed to catalog a good number of Peter Capaldi episodes of Doctor Who, and I know I've missed an episode of Class in here somewhere, but I will not be tracking it down and streaming it. Pass. I closed out the first season of Feud with Betty and Joan, which was ultimately a very satisfying series, and made a bit of progress in the third season of AMC's Better Call Saul, to which I'll probably be able to devote more attention as the series progresses.
What I've been watching.
The Trial, by the way, was not the third movie I referenced at the beginning. I didn't rewatch it for this, and I only sort of kind of remember it since I brought it in months ago. Rather, Ralph and I got over to see the Lego movie Ninjago this past weekend, and that was quite a bit of wildly colorful fun. Michael Strahan as a bald Lego guy was fun. Jackie Chan playing with Lego action figures, including one that appeared to be carved from wood, was kind of neat, and the story itself was pretty cool. That is, what people say about you is none of your business. Just go about your your day and do the best you can, even if your estranged father is an engine of destruction who doesn't so much as acknowledge your existence. That's Lloyd's deal in the town of Ninjago. He and his friends are secretly ninja warriors who battle the evil warlord Garmadon with the help of Jackie Chan as Master Wu. Lloyd overcomes social pressures and abandonment issues to battle the evil unleashed by the use of the ultimate weapon, undertakes a quest to recover the ultimate weapon, and along the way reveals truths about himself and the meaning of family. It's a pretty good film. I thought it was a little long, but in and among storytelling we've absolutely encountered before, there were some delightfully unexpected twists, and I'd say it's worth streaming if you don't feel like heading out for the more disappointing of the 2 Lego movies released this year. Lego Batman was awesome. Also, I've alluded a couple different times in this podcast to enjoying The Mayor on ABC, and I felt it was worth taking a minute to appreciate the title character, Courtney Rose, played by Brandon Michael Hall. The show is 6 episodes along now and continues to find a fun balance between Rose's fish-out-of-water approach to city governance, his youth and inexperience vying with his exuberance and ambition to make a difference for the people of Fort Gray, California. He'd run as a publicity stunt to advance his career as a rapper, but upon, to his horror, actually winning, he realizes he has something to contribute, and with the help of his friends, his mother, played by the luminous talent of Yvette Nicole Brown, and increasingly supportive political advisors like Leah Michele as Val Barella, he can battle entrenched interests like David Spade as former opponent Ed Gunt and find new solutions to old problems and, in the end, hopefully make a difference. It's a fun show, actually kind of inspiring for a former idealist like myself, a fun look at direct engagement and a refreshing view in a political landscape that otherwise tends towards the cynical these days. Great job, The Mayor. Keep up the good work. And with that, I'd better wrap this up. Thank you so much for checking in on my video cataloging project. You can check out my catalog listing along with audio links at videofuzzy.blogspot.com and past episodes of this podcast at Apple Podcasts and videofuzzy.libsyn.com. Feedback is always appreciated, and you can contact me through my blog or podcast sites or through my Video Fuzzy page on Facebook. For Video Fuzzy, I'm Terry J. Amon. Happy viewing.
It might be amazing, it might just be scuzzy. We'll find out together on Video Fuzzy.